It's Tuesday, May 5th, 2015, and you're listening to Episode 1 of the VVN Music Podcast. My name is Roger Wink, and on today's show, we'll tell you how all of this came about, take a look at the top news stories of the week, talk with John Lodge of the Moody Blues on his new album, take a look at the charts, past and present, and review the new releases of the week. Welcome to all our regular readers and new people just finding us. As I mentioned, this is the very first VVN Music Podcast, which is an offshoot from the website VVN Music. VVN Music was started a little over 9 years ago as Vintage Vinyl News, a side project for a vinyl sales site as a way to draw in additional customers. When the economy went south, so did the collectibles market, and Vintage Vinyl News spun off as a full-time website specializing in the veteran artists of music, which we define as those who have been recording for 20 years or more. The original concept behind the site was that there were hundreds of places on the internet that already covered current artists, the Katy Perrys and Justin Biebers and Maroon 5s, but very few places where a person could get news on artists who had been proven to stand the test of time, were still recording, but not getting the press that they deserved. We also were dedicated to covering all areas of popular music: rock, pop, soul and R&B, country, folk, and blues. Remember when Top 40 Radio would segue from Led Zeppelin to the Carpenters to Charlie Pride to Aretha Franklin? Well, that's the wide swath of genres that we wanted to provide on the site. So that brings us to the new podcast. Over the years, we've interviewed many artists ranging from Nils Lofgren of the E Street Band to B.J. Thomas to Ray Stevens. Those interviews were transcribed for the site, which was fine, but there was always a loss in not being able to convey the inflection that was in the voice of the artist that sometimes said more than the actual words. Now, let me tell you the real reason. Transcribing those interviews were the bane of my existence. It could take hours to get those interviews down on paper, even for those interviews that were only 15 or 20 minutes long. So that's when the idea of the VVN Music Podcast came along. It would be a way of bringing those interviews to the public fully intact, along with providing additional information about the music that we all love. There are also plans to expand the scope of the podcast as we go along. We're currently looking for contributors who can occasionally add a short audio segment to the show in their area of expertise, whether it be a particular genre of music, an era, or a specific artist, and could range from reviews to news to instructional pieces. We haven't set a regular schedule yet. That will come in the near future, but we wanted to get this premiere episode out to give you an idea of where we were going. With that said, let's take a look at the top 5 stories of the week as covered by VVN Music. These may not be the same stories as all the other media sites have covered, but rather the ones that gained the most attention from our readers for the week of April 26th to May 2nd. At number 5 is the passing of songwriter Sid Tepper. Tepper and his writing partner, Roy C. Bennett, found initial success writing for the pop music market, scoring hits with songs like Red Roses for a Blue Lady, The Naughty Lady of Shady Lane, Cupid Doll, and the Christmas songs Susie Snowflake and Nuttin' for Christmas. The duo made their first major inroads into the rock era with a series of hits recorded by England's Cliff Richard, including the number 1 songs Travelin' Light and The Young Ones. But for rock era fans, they are best remembered as the songwriters who wrote the most songs recorded by Elvis Presley. Throughout the 60s, their music was heard in most of Elvis's Hollywood films, where they penned such songs as G.I. Blues, All That I Am, and Puppet on a String. Overall, Presley performed over 50 of the duo's songs. At number 4 is the rumor and subsequent denial that Joni Mitchell was in a coma. On March 31st, the Canadian icon was found unresponsive in her home and rushed to the hospital, where she was reported to be awake and, according to her management, getting better every day. Jump ahead to this past week with a story on TMZ saying that a longtime close friend, Leslie Morris, had petitioned to become Mitchell's conservator, a move that was made because Joni remained hospitalized, was in a coma, and was unresponsive. Within hours of the initial report, Mitchell's management posted a message on her official website saying that Joni was not in a coma and was still in the hospital, but she comprehends, she was alert, and she had her full senses. A full recovery was expected, and they added that the legal move by Morris was so that someone could make care decisions once Mitchell left the hospital. Mitchell's management said on Monday that the conservatorship had indeed been granted and that Joni was expected to be heading home sometime in the near future. Number 3 for the week also originally came from a TMZ report. Word broke that blues legend B.B. King had been hospitalized again for what appeared to be dehydration, but later also added a minor heart attack. King has been fighting diabetes for years and has been having more frequent problems over the last 6 months. What made the story a bit out of the unusual was the fact that his daughter had called police to the residence and charged that his longtime manager had been committing elder abuse by not allowing her to take her father to the hospital. Police declined to press charges. Unfortunately, the story has a sad end. A message was posted on King's official site, purportedly from BB, saying that he was home again and in hospice care, which is normally reserved to make comfortable those who are entering their final days. The second biggest story of the week was the reuniting of Stephen Stills and Neil Young at a benefit concert last Sunday night. The event was the all-star Light Up the Blues concert to benefit Autism Speaks, where, along with Stills and Young, there were also performances by Sean Colvin, Steve Earle, the White Buffalo, and Chris Stills. Stills and Young took the stage together to perform 3 acoustic numbers, including Long May You Run from the Stills-Young Band album. They then went electric with an additional 6 songs that included 3 from their Buffalo Springfield days and Young's Rockin' in the Free World. A link can be found in the show notes for this podcast to the full set list and to all the other stories we're talking about here. Finally, the top story of the week, and it was by a big margin, was the marriage of Heart's Ann Wilson to Dean Weller. Wilson, who was 64, had never been married before, although she was in a relationship with the band's manager, Michael Fisher, for much of the 70s. After that relationship, very little was written about other boyfriends for Wilson until early April when her sister, Nancy, said that she was on fire, and it was all due to a new relationship with a man. Well, that new relationship evidently moved along very fast, and the two were married on Saturday, March 25th. It was only later that Anne revealed that the two had previously met back in the 80s, saying that they had gotten drunk together one night and that she tried to seduce him, but Weller was too much of a gentleman to accept. I guess it took her 30 years to realize that that was a good thing. Next, our conversation with John Lodge of the Moody Blues. John's new album, 10,000 Light Years Ago, was released today. It's his first solo album since Natural Avenue, which came out in 1977. John has been a member of the Moody Blues since 1966 and continues to record and tour with them to this day. You know, it's been 38 years since your last solo album, and I think 35 since your last single. How did you make the decision to record solo again now?
I wanted to. I've been wanting to get back in the studio to record, a Moody Blues album. Really, but that wasn't sort of on the horizon. And, I've been writing songs and getting ready, and I knew what album I wanted to write. And I'd written this song called 10,000 Light Years Ago, and I knew that should be the final track on the album, and I knew that was going to be the title of the album. And it just came about that I suddenly found a way of recording the album. I wanted to record as recorded, really, as close as I could, to the first albums of the Moody Blues, where we all sort of interacted with one another. And, the last 10 years, I suppose, albums really are made in the control room, where everyone sits in the control room, and you're plugged into the control room, and you're not actually in the studio room itself with your own environment. And, but the technical side of everything allowed me to do that, because everyone I worked with had their own studios, so we could all work together when everyone felt they were creative enough to work on the songs.
Like your work with the Moody Blues, the new album covers a wide range of styles, from rock with tracks like You Drive Me Crazy to early 20th century jazz, I Love Pass Me By. Is that something that you have always tried to do, or is it something that just comes about when you get into the writing, recording, and production process?
Well, the album really was work on a saying that I've been going through my head for some time now, that the future is always in reach, but the past has gone forever. And I was thinking, what actually does that mean? And I thought, well, it's about who I am. I want to write about an album, not retrospective at all, but an album about who I am today and what brought me here, what brought me to this place in time, and what were my influences. And so when I started to think about what has influenced my music over the years, all those different varieties, those genres, were a part of that influenced me. One of my first albums I ever bought was Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli. And, I'm not a jazz person really at all, but that album must have influenced me. And I thought, and then a few years later, we were on tour in France, in Europe, and everything else, and we did a lot of concerts with Stefan Grappelli, and I thought that may have actually got into my being, and I thought, well, one day I'm going to write a song in that genre, and this album just appeared to be the exact album for it. And of course, I started with rock and roll, and "You Drive Me Crazy" is a rock and roll song. And then I got into, obviously, the type of music that I enjoy, like 10,000 Light Years Ago and In My Mind. And then Birmingham. So it was all part, the whole album really is who I am today.
If I understand correctly, it does go back a little bit to your past, especially on those days in Birmingham, because that's more autobiographical.
Yeah,
correct?
it is, and it starts from the last verse really, because the last verse is standing on the side of the stage of another Moody Blues World Tour, and that is today, and I'm looking at all this mountain of equipment that we've got, and sound system, light system, trucks and buses and planes. And then I sort of was standing there quietly, and then I sort of went back to where it all began for me in Eddie's Cafe in Birmingham, near the school where I was at, and playing a rock older jukebox.
How did you first get involved with the Moody Blues? You weren't the original bass player for the group, but you joined really fairly early in their existence, correct?
Yeah, I met Ray Thomas, the flautist in the Moody Blues, when I was 14, 15, and we formed a band together called L Riot and the Rebels, can you believe? And we actually wore Mexican outfits. In those days, everyone had to have a gimmick, I suppose. There was Nero and the Gladiators, and they dressed as Romans, and Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, they dressed as pirates. And Ray and I, we dressed as Mexicans, even with sombreros. And for a short time, Mike Pinder, the mellotron player in the Moody Blues, he was with the band as well. And but I was at college, and I was younger than everyone else. And Ray and the band made Go Now. And then about a year after that, Ray rang me up and said, "Have you finished college yet?" And I said, "Yeah, I've just finished." And he said, "Oh, shall we get back together and reform the band?" He didn't actually say really that we're going to continue with the Moody Blues. I wasn't too sure whether the name was going to change anyway. And so, but we got together. It was 1966, and we wrote Days of Future Past, and that was it really.
You mentioned both Ray Thomas and Mike Pinder. Now, I know that you convinced them to come back and work with you on this album. How did that come about?
I'd written this song called Simply Magic. It's a song for my grandson, and when I was recording, making the demo, and I was playing the acoustic part, I suddenly realized that the instrumental I was playing on the acoustic guitar was a flute part. And Ray lives not far from me in England, and we were obviously still in contact with each other all the while. And I rang him up and said, "Ray, I've written this song for my grandson. Would you play flute?" And he said, "Yeah, of course." And so I went round to his house, played him the song, and then we went into the studio and recorded Ray's parts. And while we were doing that, he said, "Have you asked Mike? He'd be perfect on mellotron." So I rang Mike up in California and said, Mike, I've written this song for my grandson. Would you come and play on it? And he said, yeah, I'd love to. So it was easy as that, really. It was just wonderful because it really completed a circle for me, particularly on that song, because Ray and Mike are integral parts of where I am today.
There have been a number of stories lately about how you would like to see both Mike and Ray come back into the Moody Blues for the 50th anniversary of Days of Future Past. Has there been any movement on that subject?
We haven't really. I mean, we're obviously talking about Days of Future Past, and Mike was at the concert last night in Santa Rosa, and it was really great to see him again, obviously, and it was wonderful. And but we didn't discuss that. We just talked about old times, and we talked about the concert, and we talked about life in general, But no, we haven't really got to that at all. I mean, it'd be wonderful if we could find a way of doing Days of Future Past with the orchestra. But that's something I think within the next 6 months we'll be discussing, trying to find out a way of doing something nice.
That would be fantastic if you could make something like that happen. How are you are you planning on touring at all in support of the album?
Well, I think I always like to, when we released Days of Future Past in Search of Lost Chord, we hadn't thought about touring America at that time. And then, with the success of those albums, the people asked us if we come and perform them. So it's the same attitude with this album for me, really. If the album is accepted and people would like me to come and play it, yeah, I'd love to, because it's always really nice to play new songs on stage, especially if an audience has just heard them for the first time. It's always really special to see what the reaction is, and to see if we're all on the same emotional level, really.
Who else is on the album with you? Did you bring in studio people or musicians that might be able to go on the road with you, should you decide to do so?
Well, I got a core of musicians. Chris Spedding from England, guitar player, who was always with Roxy Music, and Gordon Marshall, our drummer, Alan Hewitt, who co-produced the album with me and also co-written a couple of songs with me on the album. Alan is a wonderful keyboard player, brilliant. And of course myself. And then we brought a couple of other people in, a couple of other guitarists as we were getting closer to finishing the album. I brought a violinist in called Mike Piggott, who played on the Love Passed Me By, the Stefan Grappelli, because he's a real Stefan Grappelli type person. And then another guitarist from Naples. Everything else, just we brought people in to put all the final touches on everything,
I understand that Chris Spedding also played on your first solo album back in, I guess it was 1977. I take it that he just kind of fits your style.
Yeah, well, we both come up from probably from the same place, from rock and roll. And when you say to Chris, all the guitar greats like Scotty Moore and Cliff Gallup, he knows all these guitar riffs and knows how they played them all. And so, when I was mentioning, it would be great to have sort of a Cliff Gallup type guitar on You Drive Me Crazy or something, Chris knew exactly what I was on about.
One of the great oversights of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is that the Moody Blues are not members. I mean, when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame started, it was to honor those who have influenced other musicians in particular style, and it's just wrong that the Moody Blues are not in. Is this something that kind of, I don't want to say weighs on your mind, but that you think about at all?
It obviously comes up in interviews really all the while. It doesn't. I don't really think about it when it's not an interview. But I have no idea that. I mean, they have obviously their own agenda, and that's it really. I don't. A river flows and you can't really stop it. So whatever. I can't really. I can't devote any really attention to it. But I think from the fans' point of view, it must be really frustrating, because I know if I was a fan of the Moody Blues, I'd probably really be frustrated.
Well, without what the Moody Blues did, starting in 1966 and bringing in much more sophisticated music and orchestral arrangements and so forth, it forged the way for groups like Yes, Emerson, Lake and Palmer and so forth. And if that doesn't define influence, I don't know what does.
Yeah, I don't know, perhaps we don't fit into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame model. I don't know.
What's next for the Moody Blues? I know that you tour an awful lot during the year. Is there any plans at all for another album?
Not at the moment. We're thinking about, obviously, next year, the 50th anniversary Days of Future Past, and we're thinking about a lot of things. But, we're touring at the moment. We're doing a British tour next, and then we're doing Glastonbury in the UK, a festival. And then, of course, we've got the Timeless. Universal Records have released the Timeless Flight album with, with the Polydor years, and so that's where we are at the moment. I think to make a new album, it's not just the Moody Blues who need the you need a huge support system, and you need sort of record companies. There's nothing worse than sitting down writing a song 3 o'clock in the morning, thinking to yourself, I wonder if anyone's ever going to hear this.
Have you found yourself getting involved at all, or the band getting involved in social media, because of the way that contacting the fans has changed so much in the recent years?
Yeah, I mean, the way contacting everyone has changed enormously, and that I'm really, really fortunate. My son, Christian, runs my website, and he runs all the Facebook part of everything that we do, and so he's always chasing me up for different things, and so he runs all that. He knows how important the social media is, to get your album out, and especially now it's really interesting because, my interest really, of course, is that the album is out on 180 gram vinyl. That is, to me, the most important thing, because I spent a long time with the artist Phil Slee, and we spent a couple of months trying to get the artwork right. It's because of the cover. I thought the cover was really important, and the inside of the cover, and that's the type that you need to try and get over, I think, on the social media network, that it's not just about the music, it's not just about the download, it's about the whole tactility, if that is a word, of holding an album, listening to it, and reading what the artist has tried to put into the artwork as well.
And luckily, we're in an age right now, which is fairly new, where vinyl is starting to come back in people's interest.
It really is. I mean, that's what really got me excited, because, for me, music always has been, is about sharing. And when you download, I mean, you put the earbuds in, you're the only person sharing to yourself. And but when you're playing vinyl, it's just really nice. And I noticed now you can buy all these great portable turntables and wander around with them and play everybody your music, and did what we did before, turn everybody onto an album that you really love.
Speaking of turning people on to an album, I always like to ask artists if there are any new and upcoming musicians that you are particularly impressed with.
I just listen to everything, and I think I could name a lot of different new people, but then that sort of puts me in where I'm looking at a new artist. But I think most of my music comes from not what I've got, but what I've learned to listen to, which I enjoy playing. And so it's always the people that have turned me on originally that still turn me on today, like Dave Gilmour, or that type of thing, So I'm always interested. Eric Clapton, always interested in listening to what they're doing today.
Well, John, thank you very much for talking to us. I wish you the very best of luck with the new album.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much, and thanks for the interview, and thanks for the support.
Thank you to John Lodge for taking the time for our interview. This week on the charts, Reba McEntire remained the top-selling veteran artist on the Billboard Top 200 with Love Somebody, even though the album dropped from 3 to 13. The highest charting new release by a veteran artist was a brand new compilation by Frank Sinatra in celebration of 100 years since his birth. The single-disc version of the album debuted at number 32, while the 4-CD deluxe version started at number 145. In the UK, it was all about Blur and their album The Magic Whip. The album debuted at number 1 and became the band's 6th straight chart-topping album dating back to 1994. It also was at the top of the album sales, physical album sales, vinyl album sales, and record store sales in England. 60 years ago, Perez Prado and his orchestra was at number 1 in the U.S. with Cherry Pink and Apple Blossom White. The instrumental would go on to be at the top of the charts for a total of 10 weeks and would have the distinction of being the last chart topper before the dawn of rock and roll. By early July, Bill Haley and the Comets' Rock Around the Clock would take over the number 1 spot, and the rest would be history. Perez Prado also topped the singles chart in the UK, but it would be a bit longer for rock to make its impact. Rock Around the Clock wouldn't make it to the top of the charts in Britain until November of 1955. 40 years ago this week, Tony Orlando and Dawn scored their third number 1 single with a remake of Jerry Butler's 1960 hit, He Will Break Your Heart, now known as He Don't Love You. On the album charts, Chicago 8 was at number 1, their 4th straight chart-topping album, and the 8th to hit the charts in just 6 years. And in England, Mud was at number 1 with Oh Boy, a cover of the Buddy Holly song, and the albums chart was topped by Once Upon a Star, the second album from teen heartthrobs the Bay City Rollers. Finally, 20 years ago, the U.S. singles chart had Montel Jordan at number 1 with This Is How We Do It, while the Lion King soundtrack was at the top of the albums chart. The UK saw Mark Morrison's Return of the Mac at number 1 and Picture This by Wet, Wet, Wet at the peak of the albums. This week's new releases by veteran artists is topped by John Lodge and 10,000 Light Years Ago. It is the top new release for the week at Amazon, veteran or modern artists. Also new and notable is Shelby Lynn's 13th studio album, I Can't Imagine, Annie Lennox live album, Nostalgia, An Evening with Annie Lennox, Dar Williams' Emerald, with guests Richard Thompson, Jill Sobule, and Jim Lauderdale, and the Proclaimers' Let's Hear It for the Dogs. On the reissue front, Emerson, Lake and Palmer are releasing an expanded version of their album Trilogy, with 2 extra discs of outtakes and alternate mixes, and a 5.1 version of the album. Also look for Jackie DeShannon's All the Love, the Lost Atlantic recordings, the Everly Brothers' complete U.S. and UK singles 1956 to 1962, the complete Federal King singles by Billy Ward and the Dominoes featuring Clyde McPhatter and Jackie Wilson, and an expanded version of Jethro Tull's Minstrel in the Gallery. For a complete list of new releases this week, go to VVN Music and click on the New Releases menu, selecting this week's new releases. Finally, there's an important bill making its way through Congress called the Fair Play, Fair Pay Act of 2015. This bill has a number of different sections, but 2 in particular are important to veteran artists. The first would reestablish rights for recordings released prior to 1972, so that services such as Pandora and Sirius are forced to pay royalties to the artist who recorded these earlier works. Currently, there is no copyright protection on those earlier recordings, and online services have taken the position that they do not owe royalties to the artist for playing those songs. The second part would require standard radio broadcasters to pay royalties to artists. Up until now, satellite and streaming broadcasters have had to pay royalties, while standard AM and FM stations have been protected by an early standard that says because they were promoting the records by playing them on their shows, they didn't have to pay royalties. This bill would do away with this antiquated system and put AM, FM, satellite, and streaming radio all on the same level, providing additional money to all musical artists. If you support these changes, I urge you to write your congressmen or congresswomen. There are powerful lobbies in Washington that will be trying to deep six this bill, and it's important to let Congress know that the people want to see their favorite older artists compensated fairly for the use of their recordings. That brings us to the end of the first VVN Music Podcast. Join us again in about 2 weeks for more news and conversations with the veteran artists of rock, pop, soul, country, folk, and blues. Our theme music is performed by Yazar. The VVN Music Podcast is a production of the VVN Network and is copyright 2015.